I am a therapist by training, and I've been practicing for about 28 years at this point. What's been exciting to see over all these decades is now so much stronger of an awareness and an understanding that there's a strong connection between our mental health and our physical health, and that if you take care of the mental health, you can actually lower the cost of medical care. The stigma of mental health has dropped off so dramatically. When you socialize things like mental health and behavioral health care as being something that's no different than seeing your doctor for diabetes or anything else, it allows people to feel better about accessing those services. And what I also say to people is find a provider that fits right for you. The therapeutic relationship, as we call it, or your connection or bond that you have with your therapist, in my mind, is more important than anything.
Have you ever felt so overwhelmed by your mental health concerns that it's hard to even contemplate getting help? Let's be honest. When you're really struggling, finding help and getting yourself to a therapy session can be really difficult. But that's where virtual therapy offerings like ours really make a difference. As a licensed clinical psychologist with 25 years of OCD treatment, I've worked with people to help them get their life back on track. I've also trained a clinical team to do the same here at NOCD. NOCD is an online platform offering specialized, accessible, and convenient OCD treatment. Our therapists take insurance and will work with you every step of the way to help you get your life back from obsessive-compulsive disorder. So head to NOCD.com to book a call to start your treatment journey. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on our latest podcasts and webinars. Now, on to today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. My name is Dr. Patrick McGrath, and I'm the Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD. I'm excited today to have Chris Novak with me. Chris and I go back a long time. We used to work together at the Alexian Brothers Health System in the Chicago area, and then I came over to NOCD, and then Chris came over to NOCD after we had some chats. So it was really fun to bring Chris in. And Chris, welcome. Happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to be with you.
There's an interesting part of what you do, and I think that will be unique today that we haven't really talked about on the podcast, and that will be, what are the background aspects of mental health that most people aren't aware of? You know, you've done things from helping to run a hospital system, dealing with insurance companies, making sure that therapists are hitting their metrics and doing things that they need to do in order to keep a network growing and thriving, all of that stuff that probably most people have just never had to think about whenever they're dealing with their own mental health, or a lot of therapists who might not have ever done that if they've just come in, worked for a system, and just know that they clock in, they do their job, they go home, and they don't necessarily pull the curtain back and see what's going on behind the scenes. So before we get into that, I was just wondering, can you tell people how you got into the mental health field and what brought you to this point in your career?
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. So I think a great starting point is that I am a therapist by training, and I've been practicing for about 28 years at this point. My career kind of evolved to leading and managing teams of therapists and operations, as you mentioned, within hospitals and large-scale networks of therapists. But by training, I am a therapist, and my passion and love is for helping people and to help people regain their lives. And so that's evolved over time, and I've had that great opportunity to help to develop large networks. Even had the benefit of starting up a small insurance company to create accessible care for people with specialty conditions, not only in the behavioral health side, but also on the substance use side of the field as well.
Cool. Now, how do you kind of move in from being the therapist to getting more into the operational side and assuring that things are running smoothly?
Yeah, I think for me, that's the art and the business side that comes together. And so I've always felt a passion for being able to see the operational side and what drives successful businesses, whether it be a hospital or a practice itself. And I find having that blend of being a therapist and being able to work with teams of therapists to appreciate and understand the work that they're doing and the impact that they're having on the patients and clients that they're treating has always been core to who I am. And for me, the exciting part was the ability to have an impact on a larger scale. You know, as a single therapist, I can treat my caseload of, X amount of dozens of clients that I would treat over a period of time. But to be able to develop a network, especially here, like we do at NOCD, of specialty therapists, has such a larger impact. And it allows more people to have access to high quality care that truly helps them to regain their lives and to improve the quality of life. So for me, it was a great transition to go from doing the individual clinical work to ultimately having an impact with a large network of providers.
Sure. The chief operating officer here at NOCD, tell people what that job entails. What is the work?
Sure. So my scope of responsibilities are really the overall operations of the NOCD network of therapists. So it begins with the hiring and recruitment process. And how do we select the right therapists to join our network who are passionate about the work that we do and have a passion for delivering not only high quality care, but in a compassionate way that meets our members' needs when they're initiating that journey. It then kind of moves on to the credentialing enrollment side of things and making sure that the providers that we're bringing on board have all the right credentials and that we can enroll them with the various payers that we contract with to ensure the best coverage for our members and the least out-of-pocket expense. It then leads to the onboarding and training. As many of us know that as therapists, we didn't get a lot of training in how to identify OCD properly,
right,
or how to do ERP. And so we provide and invest a lot of time and energy into every new therapist that comes in here to ensure that they know how to do that well, and to deliver the best outcomes for our members to help them truly get better. From there, it's really a network of our clinical operations managers that are supporting our network of therapists, which is now over 700 therapists across the country and in Canada. And the beauty of that is that we're here to advocate for them, to help them be the best clinicians they can, which ultimately means that they deliver the best services to our members. So my role is overseeing all those aspects from the recruitment side to ensuring high quality services for all the members that come to our care.
So that takes about an hour a day is what you're basically saying, right?
Maybe two.
Maybe two. Okay. All right. There's an aspect in there that I think I would like to focus on with you today, because again, most people really aren't aware of insurance. There's this assumption sometimes, I have insurance, I gave you my card, what is this payment that I have to give to you now? Why don't I have insurance? And you told me this was covered by insurance. So why do I still have to offer money? Can you maybe give us a just 101 version of what is insurance and what are some of the terms and things that are important to know? Because I'm always fearful that people with mental health will maybe, especially in the OCD world, potentially overthink or overanalyze. What does this mean? They're reading the contract word for word. They're worried about, hey, who can get my information, or how do they know what I'm working on? Just there's so many nuances that I think would be important that we could maybe just throw it on the table so everyone has a more transparent understanding of what happens in the insurance world.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for most people, especially if you haven't used your insurance, we may be used to going to the doctor for an annual wellness visit, right? And so maybe that's the only experience we've had with using our insurance. We know what that card says, but what that card says is sometimes very complicated. And so where I oftentimes like to start with people is making sure that you reach out to your insurance company. And you can do that a couple of different ways. Nowadays you can jump onto a website and kind of use the provider search feature to find out, is there a psychologist or a social worker or a professional therapist in your community who's covered by your own plan? That's a great way to check that. You can certainly call the customer service number as well, too. But even once you find that you have a provider that's a part of your insurance network, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. And there are terms that are sometimes thrown around like deductible. So what does this term deductible mean? So deductible in its kind of easiest sense is, what is the amount of money that I have to spend out of my pocket before my insurance company is going to start to cover something at a certain rate? So maybe my insurance will cover services at 80%, but only after I satisfy meeting a $5,000 deductible. So in that scenario, it means I actually have to pay out of pocket that $5,000 before my insurance actually starts to cover at that 80% level. In some instances, I may have something that's called a copay, which simply means that the insurance company is going to pay the majority of the bill, but I have to pay maybe a $40 or a $50 copay every time I see my therapist. So those are a couple of, I think, simplistic ways to look at how insurance works and some terms that I think a lot of our members experience. I think the unique challenge is that just because the insurance says that you're covered for something, there can be complicating factors that come into play depending upon the specific plan that you're in. So I'll use an example. Maybe I have Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, but my employer has opted for a sub-select plan within Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois. And so it may not mean that every Blue Cross of Illinois provider is actually a part of my insurance network. Maybe it's a very small, narrow network within that larger insurance company. So that's why my suggestion always is a great place to start is that provider finder on the website, or to pick up a phone and call customer service. Now, the beauty here at NOCD is that whenever a member contacts our intake team, we're going to gather that information and we're going to verify their insurance benefits and actually provide them what we call as a good faith estimate of what the coverage is going to be. And we'll let our members know if for some reason we aren't a part of their insurance plan. We'll let them know that on the front end, because for us, we want to have what I would say is ultimate transparency, so they're not surprised by bills in any way. Last thing we want to do is have them get a few sessions into meeting their therapist and find out for some reason something isn't covered or that the expense was more than they had anticipated.
Couldn't there also be like you could have this insurance, but then there's a different insurance company that manages the behavioral health piece of it or something like that too?
Yeah, no, that's a really great call out. So in the insurance world, there's a term that's called a carveout. And so what this means is, and I'll use United Healthcare, for example. United Healthcare, a very large medical insurance company that most people have probably heard of. But for behavioral health, they actually have a separate entity called Optum Behavioral Health. And Optum Behavioral Health manages everything related to behavioral health and substance use. So the claims ultimately don't go to United Healthcare. They actually go to Optum Behavioral Health. And so as providers, our agreement or our arrangement is actually not with United Healthcare, but with Optum. And so sometimes your insurance card may say that on the back or sometimes at the bottom of the card. But that's where I think our team can help, is to explain to the member that, yes, your card may say United Healthcare, but really for the behavioral health side of things, they use a company called Optum Behavioral Health. And the good news is that we're actually a part of that insurance company. So we're going to be covered with you.
Some people might say, hey, can you just not charge the copay or the deductible and just bill the insurance company? I don't think that's legal. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are some federal regulations that say that we must charge the copay or the coinsurance. So again, two terms. Copay would be usually that kind of small out-of-pocket amount, maybe $25, $40 that you pay per service when you go.
Okay.
Coinsurance is my portion of that percentage of coverage. So if we go back to the other example I gave of maybe the insurance covering 80%, my coinsurance would be the other 20% that I have to owe after the insurance company pays the provider.
And then for some insurances, there's also a out-of-pocket max, right? Like once you've paid out certain number, you won't have to pay out anymore after that, correct?
That is correct. There is something. So I think what's important to know is for both your deductible and that out-of-pocket max, it's not just about the behavioral health services they are accessing. It's everything. Mm-hmm. So if, let's say, I wound up in the hospital and wound up in the hospital for a few days, and we know hospital bills are expensive. So I might satisfy my deductible, that say $5,000 amount that we talked about, from other areas of my healthcare and not just from my behavioral health services. The same thing applies for what's called an out-of-pocket maximum. And so that out-of-pocket maximum is the insurance company sets a limit on how much the subscriber, or the individual who has the insurance, will actually pay out of their pocket before they're going to cover at, say, 100% or a higher level.
Okay.
So I may have a $5,000 deductible, but maybe after $7,500 out of my pocket, the insurance company now says we're going to cover the rest of it going forward because that's the kind of the maximum that they're expecting me to have to pay.
Gotcha. Sounds complicated.
It is complicated. And what I always say is trust your healthcare providers to help have that dialogue with you. And again, also reach out to your insurance company. Don't ever feel hesitant to make that customer service phone number. Those are the individuals who are trained to speak to you specifically about your insurance plan and what your coverages are.
And sometimes, Chris, isn't it true that we might call and get information, and then the member a week or two later might get different information because maybe between the time that call happened, a bill came in or something, and therefore it changed everything because now there's a different amount or you might have been more toward your max or something like that, right? Could that happen?
Yeah, it's a dynamic process, and so it really is about timing. So you're absolutely right. I could call your insurance company today, and they won't know that you have 3 claims that are pending from your chiropractor, your primary care doctor, a specialist that you're seeing. So it is all dependent upon that. And so at the time I call, maybe it doesn't look like you've satisfied your deductible or your out-of-pocket maximum, and then those claims come in, and next thing we know, you actually have met your deductible. So it's a bit of a timing issue more than anything. And the other element that I would say is that there is also a human element to this. There are times when somebody could call and verify benefits, for example, to find out what the coverage is, and somebody on the other end might give misinformation.
Yeah.
It's important to understand the type of care that you're accessing. Sometimes your coverage for mental health could be different than your coverage for your medical care, depending upon how your plan is set up.
Right.
So I think if you're going to call your insurance company, be very clear and very specific about the type of care that you're accessing to get the most accurate information.
And then all this stuff resets on January 1, doesn't it? So you start all over again.
It does. It all resets at the beginning of the year. And if you're lucky enough to be with the same plan, it's resetting at the beginning of the year. But your employer may choose to move from Blue Cross to Cigna, for example, or to United Healthcare. And so the coverage that you had may not just be about those levels resetting, but now having to understand what the new coverage is with your new insurance plan. I think the exciting part is there is such great federal requirements now around what's called parity to ensure that people have equal access and equal coverage for mental health care in line with medical care. That's been a huge evolution in the last 10 years. So I think that's exciting to see.
And you saw that a lot. I mean, we worked at a hospital system. So what was your experience of that, about how that came about with medical payments versus mental health payments? Because, I would watch you and our friend Clay, our CEO there, come back from meetings, and, the budget talks were so just all over the place, depending on which hospital and what was the behavioral health portion of it. And then our hospital was all behavioral health and margins and everything. It was always kind of a fascinating thing to look at, right?
Yeah, it's been, it's interesting doing this work now for about 30 years. The changes that have happened in the insurance landscape has been dramatic. And I think originally it was really a fight about equity and making sure that people with behavioral health or substance use conditions weren't being discriminated in the sense of actually getting covered at a lesser level. Years ago, we would see where there would be limits on care. So for example, you might be able to go see your chiropractor or your primary care doctor or another specialist, and the insurance company would never think twice about just continuing to pay those claims. But if you wanted to go see a therapist or a psychiatrist, there were arbitrary limits that were put on things, not only meaning that instead of it being covered at, say, 80%, maybe they would only cover your behavioral health at 50%. But beyond that, they would limit the number of sessions that you could go to. So maybe you could only see all of your behavioral health providers, the psychiatrist and the therapist, for only 20 sessions a year. And then at that point, you were kind of cut off. And if you wanted to continue to see services, you would have to pay those 100% out of your own pocket. So that's where a lot of the federal parity legislation came about, was to acknowledge that behavioral health really should be seen at the same level. It's been a battle over many decades for it to get there, and it's exciting to see that now. So now your benefits should be the same for medical and on the behavioral health side, without any arbitrary limits or kind of caps on things. The thing that I think has really driven this over the years is a good, strong appreciation and understanding about how behavioral health impacts medical care.
Sure.
And, I think for so long they were seen in kind of two separate silos, that behavioral health was its own thing, medical was another thing, and the two didn't have any interplay with each other. You and I know, as therapists, have been doing this for so darn long that when people emotionally are not in a good place, it impacts medical care. We know that people who are grappling with OCD oftentimes have higher cost of medical care. Yes. Spend more time in the emergency department or at their doctor's office. And so what's been exciting to see over all these decades is now so much stronger of an awareness and an understanding that there's a strong connection between our mental health and our physical health. And that if you take care of the mental health, you can actually lower the cost of medical care. And so that's been exciting to see.
It was always one of the things I appreciated about the Alexian brothers, who seemed to understand that decades before many other people and many other systems did, their absolute appreciation of the mental health aspect of things.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I think there was a saying, and I can't remember who said it, but there is no physical health without mental health.
Yeah.
So
now you've dealt with entire hospital systems. Our hospital had all sorts of programs going on. I'm interested. I know you hadn't done ERP training or anything before coming into to Alexian Brothers, and then we meet, and you see people in the halls sitting with signs saying, "Please come up and ask me a question," or "Please stare at me, but don't say anything." What was it like to see intensive ERP going on in the situations that we were in at the hospital there? Yeah.
Yeah, those are great memories. I mean, I remember some of the conversations you and I would have in the hallways about what you were doing and why you were doing it.
Why is this happening?
Exactly. So those were fun. The people sitting in the lounge area, or when we'd see you or some of your colleagues in the bathroom with patients, and, practicing exposures, and so
or in the parking garage leaning over the ledge or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think for me, and it goes back to kind of my groundings as a therapist. I didn't get a lot of training in OCD.
Yeah.
Had an awareness of it. It was one of many things in the spectrum of anxiety disorders. And so being trained in how to properly treat it and to do ERP was just not a part of my training as it is for so many therapists.
Almost all.
So,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think seeing how that worked and why it worked was a huge eye opener for me. And I so appreciated having the ability to, no pun intended, have the exposure to see how ERP worked. The other thing that I think was very unique about the setting that we worked in was we had specialty niche programs. Yeah. So many behavioral health providers, not just hospitals and health systems, but even large behavioral health practices, they tend to be generalists and do a little bit of all different types of work. And what I really appreciated about in that scenario was we had specialty anxiety and OCD programs. We had specialty programs for eating disorders. And so from a quality of care standpoint, what was, I think, so wonderful for the care and the outcomes that we saw was that people got to be with like people who were struggling with the same conditions. If I'm grappling with OCD myself and I'm in a room with somebody who's dealing with depression, it's not the same experience.
Yeah.
And the treatment, as I saw from that time of us working together, is so very different, and you get tremendously different outcomes because the treatment focuses are different.
Yeah, it was great. We could cross-track people also, so they could have their main treatment, but we knew that anxiety played a role in a lot of these lives, and so we had the ability to make that happen, which was always wonderful.
Right.
You've gotten to meet with cool people who have been really into the mental health world, even at the state and federal level. Can you tell people about what some of those experiences have been like interacting with our government and talking about mental health?
Yeah, I have had some phenomenal experiences talking to legislators at all levels of our government, to your point, at the federal level, at the state level. For me, what I think is always so wonderful to hear is that mental health touches everyone. It's touched, people in your life, my life, and it does the same thing for our legislators. The people who feel most passionate about wanting to advance things like parity legislation and increasing access to services, it tends to be because of a personal calling. And so for some, it's their own personal journey that they as individuals have been on, and they just now happen to have found themselves now in Congress or at the state legislature level. I think the interesting piece is that there is a shared appreciation of the need to continue to advance mental health awareness, to make sure that coverage is there, that access to care is always being expanded. What's interesting is that it always boils down to kind of the financial piece. Nobody ever seems to argue and say, no, we shouldn't provide more access for mental health, or no, we don't need more providers available to increase that access. The challenge becomes, especially at the federal level, when you start to look at the amount of dollars that are going to be spent on, say, the Medicare or the Medicaid system, or the support that comes to the local states for the Medicaid plans. And so I think that is always the struggle is how do you advance legislation that, from a budget or financial standpoint, the states and the federal government are able to support in the midst of everything else. So those have been the exciting pieces. But what I would say that I always take away from those conversations is just a firm awareness and understanding, and an inquisitiveness. In every one of those conversations, the dialogue's always been turned to me or the colleagues that I've been with to to ask for our experience of what it's like to be on the front lines of delivering this care. What do we see the obstacles to be? What are the barriers to access the treatment? And if we kind of had the magic wand, what would we need to provide kind of better and more affordable and accessible care? So the passion is probably the piece that's the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah, and I've always enjoyed those meetings too. I remember Chris Kennedy, I think, when we were out in Boston one time, he came into a meeting, and when we were doing some stuff, and it was just so nice to see, someone at that level, who's in the Senate, who's just really wanting to make sure that there are changes happening. So that's great.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now in the work that you're doing, and you're surrounded by OCD, right? I mean, you joined an OCD company and you're wearing the swag. Congratulations. So you're in it now. How has your perception of OCD changed? Or have you even ever looked back at people maybe you treated when you were doing more on the therapy side and thought, maybe that was an OCD case actually, and there might have been something else to do there or something like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's funny. There probably isn't a week that doesn't go by that I don't reflect upon somebody that I treated that I probably diagnosed as a generalized anxiety disorder or something along those lines. And I think back and I go, yeah, that was probably OCD. And, I wasn't trained in ERP at that point. So my go-to probably was CBT at the time. And although it helped, it certainly didn't have the impact, and it certainly didn't progress their treatment like we've seen ERP do for our members. For me, I think what has been so exciting to see and what I appreciate about the work that we do here is that we measure outcomes.
Right.
Not every behavioral health provider does that, and I feel so passionately about that. It's always been a part of my career as a therapist and as a professional that measurement-based care is at the core of what we should be doing, to be able to demonstrate that what we're doing is actually making an impact on the people's lives that we're working with. It's also great to be able to work with a client or a member to be able to show them that they're actually getting better. When sometimes subjectively they don't have that impression of themselves. But what I've been continue to be amazed by is, although OCD by definition affects a smaller portion of the population, the impact that it has on people's lives and their families' lives and their work and professional careers is significant. Mm-hmm. And when I meet with therapists and do clinical interviews, one of the questions that sometimes people will ask is it going to be somewhat homogenous or boring only seeing OCD? And my answer is absolutely not, because it presents itself in so many different ways. And the impact that it has on people's lives is so varied. And so I haven't met a therapist yet that I've talked to here at NOCD that has said, this is somewhat kind of homogenous or monotonous work. Every case is so different, and the impacts on lives is unbelievable. And so that's the piece. For me, being here, I found extremely rewarding to be a part of a specialty program that provides the most evidence-based care and that can get people better in such a short amount of time. And to see those wonderful stories about how people have jumped on a plane to go see a family member they haven't seen in 25 years, or the member who was afraid to hold their newborn child because they were afraid that something was going to happen to that child by them holding them, and that happening, months, if sometimes years later, it is so rewarding and so reassuring to know that we change people's lives every day here.
Yeah. You are obviously still in contact with a lot of the people we've known and that you've interacted, and you had so much more across the nation than I did with the position that you had at the hospital. What is the word on the street in terms of thoughts about behavioral health care in the next 10 years? We see hospitals like on the medical side, right? There's been this growth of, it used to be everybody came into the hospital to get their surgeries and see the machines. And now you can go over here in the strip mall and get an MRI and
right.
Things like that, right? So you've seen that spread, and hospitals have had to change and adjust what they do and how they do it. What do you see on the behavioral healthcare side about how things are changing and adjusting, especially to as like artificial intelligence comes in and virtual reality or things of that nature?
Yeah, I think technology has been a game changer for us, right? I mean, technology, I think there's two defining moments. One, the advancements of technology and things like AI. COVID, whether we want to say it or not, I mean, it was a defining moment in healthcare in general, and it thrust us into telehealth, for example. People have been dabbling in telehealth before COVID, but when we had no choice but to go essentially virtual in so many areas of medicine, it launched and really, I think, jettisoned healthcare into a whole new area that I don't know that it was before that ready to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about behavioral health, I think about a strong focus in specialization. I think about a strong focus in accessibility and lower levels of care. So don't get me wrong, there's always going to be a need for a hospital and inpatient behavioral health units. We're always going to have people that are suffering with very significant conditions that need the safety of an inpatient unit and that wraparound care at that time. But I think what we've learned is that if we can focus our attention on early identification, good assessment, whether it be in a primary care office or making assessment and access to care like a virtual platform similar to NOCD available to people, the sooner we can intervene and identify what the underlying condition is, the faster we know we can get people back to wellness, health, and ultimately regain the quality of their life. The other component that I will add is that the stigma of mental health has dropped off so dramatically. I don't know about you, but I mean, I talk to kids that are, my kids' age and younger, and talking about going to see your therapist is it's a conversation that nobody even thinks twice about.
Right.
Probably very different than you and I growing up, right? Our parents didn't talk about if there was family members or friends or family who were going to see a psychiatrist or going to see a psychologist. Those were, for lack of a better term, a bit taboo topics those were the things that you talked about in your home, only with your most immediate family. But now people will talk about it out in open. And so I think when you socialize things like mental health and behavioral health care as being something that's no different than seeing your doctor for diabetes or anything else, it allows people to feel better about accessing those services. So for me, it's an exciting time to see not only has accessibility grown with telehealth being available. I don't have to take time off of work at this point to go see a doctor or a therapist. If I have the ability, I could see you as my therapist during my lunch hour. And it's just another point in the day. So that accessibility, critically important. You touched on technology, and I think there are so many wonderful things that have happened with technology. Some therapists have said to me or asked the question, do you think AI is going to take over for therapists? And I somewhat chuckle because I said, I don't know how that's possible. But has AI guided us as therapists to be better at assessments, to be better documenters, to make our lives easier from an efficiency standpoint, to not be buried under a mountain of notes at the end of the day? Absolutely. And so I think there's the benefits to AI. I think it's also beneficial when we think about assessments and early identifications of things. There are so many online symptom checkers that are available these days. And so if people are going to gravitate towards using technology, especially younger ages, if it can help them to understand what's going on and what they're feeling is something real, and make them take that next step to reaching out to a professional like ourselves, then to me, it's a win. You touched on virtual reality, and I think virtual reality has been another interesting evolution. You and I used it, again, back in the past for things like PTSD, and I think there's some great ways to use it for virtual exposures, maybe in the earlier phases of treatment for people. So I think all of these things are kind of added to our toolkit to make us more effective as providers.
Yeah. And what excites you about the future, more specifically for NOCD in general, and where you see things going for us as a company?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to where we started our conversation around payer coverage. One of the things that I love here is that we have so many covered lives across the country because of the payer relationships that we have. Let's face it, healthcare is not cheap. It's not always the most affordable. People are grappling these days with a lot of things to balance financially. And so the more we can do to make our care not only accessible via our telehealth platform and being available in all the countries and states that we're in, that's one piece. But from my standpoint, what's most important is making it affordable. When something's affordable, it makes it easier for people to commit to care, to stay with care, and to help themselves stay healthy. And so that's the exciting part is our ongoing quest to make sure that we have good payer coverage across the country, across all different types of payers, to just make the care so much easier and cost effective for our members.
Yeah. You get to meet a lot of therapists in your role, right? And what have you found that keeps you motivated to do this job, right? What do you enjoy seeing from them or watching as they evolve into the role. I know for me, I love those aha moments where, somebody will do an ERP exercise and they'll put on, like one of our message boards, this person left their house for the first time in 2 years, right? Today. I mean, just those are the things that keep me motivated on the clinical side of things. What do you see as the growth of the therapists is really exciting for you?
Yeah, those are some of my favorite meetings. I mean, I meet with dozens of therapists across our network every week, and not only just as a part of their onboarding experience, but one-on-one. And I ask a couple of questions always when I'm in those meetings. What do you love about the job? What can we do different to make your experience as a therapist better here? But what comes out of those conversations is, and you put it perfectly, the aha experience. So many times, going back to the concept of hiring, people don't understand the impact and the power of how fast ERP works. And so what I hear all the time is, I can't believe how fast I got my member better. Or I can't believe the impact that it had when I got my first treatment conqueror. And I see the confidence in their eyes and kind of the glow in their face. I was talking with a therapist a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about scheduling, for example. And he said, I always knew why the cadence and the protocol of the sessions that we do is the way it is. He said, but when I saw my first member actually become a treatment conqueror and actually overcome all those symptoms that they started with, he said that the switch flipped for me. And it became so much easier now that I had the personal experience of seeing somebody on that journey actually get to the point of conquering their OCD, that it just made sense for me. He said, it wasn't that I didn't know it all along, but when I saw it firsthand, I now have so much more confidence when I talk with my new members coming in about, here's how it works, here's why it works, and I know I can get you better, and here's how it's going to happen. Yeah. And so I think if you haven't done this work before, you and I sometimes talk about this concept of getting reps, meaning, you got to get a few sessions under your belt to feel some confidence in doing this. And that's exactly what I heard from this therapist. But I love that glow that I see from them about how fast they're changing their lives. And I love, like you said, those stories that are getting posted throughout the week about what they're doing differently in their lives and how they've regained so much that they've lost for so long.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, this conqueror concept, we're looking at least 2 assessment periods where people have achieved more than a 35% reduction in the symptoms from when they came in. So really showing that we're really removing a big portion of what OCD is trying to do to drive a person's life. And as we help to put people into the driver's seat instead of OCD being in the driver's seat of the lives they're living. Chris, what else should people know just in terms of how to approach the mental health piece, right? We hear on our side, with what we're doing clinically, the stigma and those types of things. And we're always trying to help deal with that as you're helping therapists grow, but you have so many reach outs into other areas. And I'm still really interested, and I think people watching this today will be the most interested in, what can we continue to do to advocate for mental health, keep making sure that parity stays, and making sure that insurance companies are also adequately paying therapists, right, for the work that they're doing. And maybe there isn't such a disproportionate aspect of medical people get paid these things, but on the mental health side, we pay these things too. How can we continue to advocate in those areas?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. First and foremost, in terms of advocating for mental health, the one thing that I always say to friends who know that I'm in the field and are worried about a family member, for example, or maybe even themselves, and I'm sure you've had these conversations too, I always encourage people, have the dialogue. If something doesn't feel right, you're thinking in a way that seems so different and it's bothering you, reach out and talk to somebody, whether it's your spouse, a family member, or somebody. That support, I think, is critically important. But then to take it to the next step, have a conversation with your primary care provider. Reach out to NOCD or to a behavioral health provider to just have an evaluation. Just because you go for a visit doesn't mean that you're locked into something. You have a choice. And what I also say to people is find a provider that fits right for you. The therapeutic relationship, as we call it, or your connection or bond that you have with your therapist, in my mind, is more important than anything. And so if the connection doesn't feel right, you think to yourself, okay, I met with Patrick, but maybe I'd feel more comfortable with a female therapist. Make the switch.
Yep.
So often our members stay in care for so long. And I saw this as a therapist myself. I'd see somebody that saw a provider for sometimes years on end. And I asked what worked and what didn't work and why did they make the switch? And they said, yeah, a year or two ago, I didn't feel like it was the right fit, but I was afraid to tell my provider that it wasn't working for me.
Sure.
So advocate for yourself. Find the provider that feels like the best fit for you. I think those are the absolute most important things to think about. And again, just take the step. Pick up the phone, call our intake team, talk to a provider, have the dialogue. We'll help guide you through that conversation. I know it's scary and it's anxiety provoking to make that phone call. And I'm always so proud when people take that next step. But sometimes I worry that people have waited too long and have suffered for so long that had they made the phone call earlier, we probably could have helped them to regain some of their life faster. So I always encourage people, just take the step, take the leap. The worst that's going to happen is that you decide you're not ready after that phone call, but you learn something new about what access and care is like. You've learned what the next steps would be. So if you're not ready now, at least you know what the next steps are. And that first step won't be as hard the next time around.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you for this conversation. I think it was very helpful for folks. They get to know you and the role that you have here at NOCD, which is such an important role, making sure that our network is providing the most optimal care to all of the members who come to see us, because that's what they deserve. If they're going to spend their time and their money with us, they ought to get an A+ treatment. And that's always the goal that we're going to be pushing around.
Agreed.
Awesome. And thank all of you for joining us today. Also, glad you got to know our Chief Clinical Officer, Chris Novak, a little bit more. He may not be out there like I am on the podcasts and doing all of the various webinars and things, but I couldn't do the work that I do without the help of Chris. And I think we make a great team. I was so excited when Chris decided to come over to NOCD. I kept saying, Chris, I think I got something for you. And he's testing the water. So it was really cool when he came over. So I continue to enjoy our working relationship as well, Chris. It's great.
Agreed. Now, thank you for having me, Patrick.
Awesome. And thank all of you for joining. If you like the Get to Know OCD podcast, you can subscribe on the NOCD YouTube channel. And if you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, you can check us out at NOCD.com. That's NOCD.com. And don't forget our NOCD 411 sessions. If you have questions about OCD, but you're not ready for therapy, or you're a family member or a friend and you just want to know information about it, we can set those up as well. Until next time, we'll see you then.